Welcome to the Healthy Christian Leader. I'm Dwight Habermel. Come join me in the living room for some honest conversations. I'll be talking to guests about their journey with Christ through the joys, the challenges, and the messiness of leadership. There's always something to learn from someone's story, so let's get started.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Healthy Christian Leader Show. I'm Rachel Habermel, and I'm the Operations Manager here at Ministries. And today I'm in conversation with Dr. Richard MacGillivray. And we've already had a great conversation about conflict resolution in the workplace. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to that, feel free to jump back and listen to that before jumping into this conversation. But now we're going to talk about the role of a leader in conflict resolution. So Dr. MacGillivray, welcome back.
Thank you.
So as a first question, to what extent is it the responsibility of the leader in the workplace, whether that's the pastor of the church, the manager of the company, or so on, to what extent is it the responsibility of that leader to set a tone and example for how conflict should be dealt with in that environment?
Well, I actually think that that's fairly crucial. The definition of leadership is, the Queen used to call herself we when she spoke. It actually wasn't a bad use of pronouns. All leaders should think we. You kind of trade in your personal pronouns when you get to be in charge, because leaders need to think systemically. They need to think as us. A leader who approaches leadership from I want to get what I want is going to be an ineffective leader. A leader has to understand the organism that he or she is at the head of, because leaders don't accomplish anything. A good leader doesn't accomplish anything by making it happen on his or her own.
Right.
We have to work through other people. One of the mistakes I think that ineffective leaders make is that they have a tendency to think, if I get what I want, then I'm a good leader. That is rarely true. A good leader ensures that we all have a role to play in getting what is in the best interest of this church, or this unit of a hospital, or this factory, or whatever it might be. We have to think beyond that. I've said to leaders in the past when I've been consulting with them, if you walk away from a negotiation with your staff and you think that you have won, you've got everything you want, you've lost. Because if you've got everything you want, what you've gotten, you may get what you want in this particular situation, but what you've planted is resentment and inefficiency.
Yeah.
And so your goal as a leader is to, it goes back to what we were talking in the last episode, your good listening skills. You need to understand what your people want. You need to foster their ability to express that. And you have to, as much as you can, facilitate that as far as that works to the general overall benefit of the organization as a whole. Your goal as a leader is always to think of what the purpose of the organization as a whole is.
Right. Yeah.
If the organization is accomplishing that goal, then you're doing well. I've been in many, many places that I've been doing consulting in where what the actual essential purpose of the organization was not even on the table.
Right.
Whether there's the members of the church or the staff of this institution or whatever it might happen to be, we're talking about all kinds of things except what this church or this hospital or this factory is supposed to be doing. And so you need to think that way as a leader, and that I think sets a tone for other people. Because if you think systemically, you can try to elicit that from other people. Right. Especially people who are in disagreement with each other. Leaders oftentimes end up, they're like the referee between different divisions or different individuals or and so forth. And so they need to be able to develop that skill. And a lot of the times that's what I taught. When I was, part of my role is not just facilitator, I'm a bit of a teacher when I go into an organization. And I'm teaching leaders or helping leaders to learn or to perceive that that's an important role for them.
So it sounds like the role of a leader is really to spearhead good communication in the organization, representing the whole group.
That's
and set
right.
that tone. Yeah.
That's very much true. Leaders also need to understand the resources that their organization offers to them. Like I was saying in a previous episode, we need to look at how the components are interdependent on each other, how they relate to each other, how they adapt. They have to adapt to each other and to things that are going on in the organization. And we also need to use the resources themselves. So we need to know what the talents of our people are.
Right, yeah.
And make sure that we utilize those talents well. One of the mistakes we sometimes make is, and I've seen this especially in larger organizations, where we tend to go by seniority or we go by whatever. Sometimes we overlook that people who may not be that senior have something to say here.
Sure.
And sometimes, the flip side is true, sometimes when people have been around for a long time, we stop listening to them. And so I think the idea of being able to elicit the talents that people have is very important, to recognize them and to give them a chance to shine. So we, and also I guess the last thing is that leaders try to make sure that the people in the organization are aware of what's coming, what the external forces on the organization are. Oftentimes we see that, especially in modern organizations, which are much more fluid than they used to be. And the challenges are sometimes unpredictable. And sometimes the way the company finds out, or the church finds out, or whatever, or the school, is through the leader.
Right.
The leader says, this is what's happening, this is what we have to be prepared for, this is what we have to do next.
Yeah, it sounds like the leader really does play the role of the referee.
That's right.
Yeah.
Referee,
really interesting.
weather person,
Sure.
A little bit of, the person who sees what's coming.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Now, when conflicts arise in an organization, if a leader's not directly involved, so maybe it's a conflict between two staff members, between a department or staff member and the client, or between people in the congregation, how can a leader know when it's appropriate for them to step in if it's not something that's directly, involving them?
Okay, that's a good question, because you could have overly intrusive leaders, and leadership conveys a certain advantage to the leader, in which is almost, it's the kind of the buck stops here phenomena.
Right. Yeah.
That when you get to the stage of the leader, this becomes almost formal. So it is important for leaders to recognize who else in the organization is suited to deal with this. It's good for leaders to kind of keep the pulse of the organization. And so in most cases, whether it's if it's in a church, the pastor towards other people who are dealing with different ministries or services within the church, if it's a school, principal to vice principal to teachers and so forth. If it's in a nursing unit, it's the nursing unit manager to more senior nurses, or depending on how it plays out and so forth. You need to, those people are your ears. And for them to have a sense of what's going on the ground is very important. And if at all possible, for them to facilitate. I mean, it's kind of old hat, but ideally if you have a disagreement with somebody, you go to them first.
Right.
And this is something you should foster in the organization, that this is how we deal with disagreements here. Talk to each other. If you can't get it sorted out, go one rung up the ladder. One of the problems is that an impasse can happen at any rung in that ladder. If you go right to the overall leader and you hit an impasse, well, what do we do now?
Yeah.
So we try to work things out. As a leader, you should have as a basic idea that I don't solve any problems in this organization that can be solved by any other level in this organization besides me.
That's so important, yeah.
That's right. So you should always try to utilize the people that you have in the organizational structure. The other thing about that is that fosters the competence of those people and their confidence, and it also builds the confidence of people at the front lines of your organization in the organization as a whole.
Right, you're empowering leadership for others.
That's right.
Yeah.
One of the things I've seen a lot, again, this is especially in larger organizations, is that if somebody is at a lower level of leadership is not respected or is not effective, people, they do one of those maladaptations. They work around that person. They effectively draw a red circle around them.
Right, yeah.
And that person stops being a resource. Because remember, leaders try to utilize the resources well. If you've got a lower level person who's in a sort of a subordinate leadership role, if they're ineffective, that causes all kinds of ripples in the organization that can become quite dysfunctional. And it also leads to things like cliques. It leads to people being left out of the loop, not knowing, partly because their own immediate, for want of a better term, manager doesn't know what's going on anymore.
Right, yeah.
So I think it is important for leaders to foster leadership at people at different rungs in the ladder. So that there's a better chance that it will be resolved before it becomes a systemic problem.
No, that's so important. So it sounds like it's really important that leaders are empowering people in their positions.
That's
You're
right.
putting people in positions where they're playing to their strengths, and they can be a good resource in that role, and you're empowering them to be in that role.
That's right. I mean, it's like a hockey game. If you're a star hockey player, a Sidney Crosby or Nathan McKinnon, it's nice if you get goals, and people love it if you get goals.
Sure.
But assists are worth just as much.
Right, yeah.
And if you actually end up being a good playmaker and your team gets a lot of goals, that's actually better for the team than it is for you to just have a high number of goals yourself. And we see this in professional sports, not to use this analogy for very long, but you'll see teams that have one person has lots of records and lots of good accomplishments, but the team doesn't make the playoffs.
Right, yeah.
It's better if you're a leader and problems get solved and you get no credit for it, but things are running along smoothly, good job.
Right, yeah.
You've done well.
That's huge. Well, and that kind of goes back to your first point too of the leader spearheading conflict resolution for the group and representing the group.
That's right.
But empowering the group as a whole to function effectively.
That's right.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Now, when we go into conflict resolutions, especially as a leader, if you're going in to mediate a conflict perhaps, ideally, you come out with this great outcome where everyone feels heard and, you have a win-win and all of this.
Yes.
But when that's not possible, what should a leader focus on as their primary goal going into a conflict resolution? Is that achieving a win-win? Is that making sure everyone feels heard? Is that reinstating equilibrium? What's that primary goal they should keep in their sights?
Well, the primary goal always has to be that the organization addresses the purpose of the organization. It's not good if everybody's happy and nobody's coming to church.
Right, yeah.
Or your product is not selling at the store. So I think you always have to have that as an overarching thing. But having said that, that is best accomplished if you use the resources of the organization as a whole to affect that outcome. So because it is true. Conflict is not necessarily a bad thing, and not every time can everybody win. Sometimes you have to accept that it doesn't work out. If the process, as I was saying, I think in the previous episode, if the process is one in which people feel heard and respected and that they can contribute, sometimes we have to accept that it just won't go that way.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing. And I think you find oftentimes that organizations that have constructive conflict can be very, very healthy. President John F. Kennedy was once quoted, after a fiasco early in his term, he said about his cabinet, "Get me some people in here who will disagree with me."
Right, yeah.
And I thought, there's a sign of maturity as a leader, to be able to have a frank and open discussion in some disagreement,
Yes,
and let's see what we can do with this.
Yeah.
So that can be a good sign that you, if you as a leader can foster that, there's a good chance you have a healthier organization.
Absolutely. Well, it's like that it's like that biblical concept that iron sharpens iron, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
No, that's very interesting.
Yeah. And not to use a lot of biblical examples, but
Yeah.
I mean, there was nothing wrong with what the Pharisees were trying to do in preserving a great respect for the tradition of the Jewish law and faith. In fact, it was a wonderful thing to have in mind, but they forgot the purpose, at least in the Gospels.
Right.
So we need to keep those two things reconciled.
No, that's huge. Keeping that why right in front of us, right?
Yeah.
Like why we're here and what our purpose is.
Right.
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
really interesting.
Yeah.
In a workplace structure, when you're resolving conflicts, how much should you rely on professionalism and policies and systems and HR structures versus personal connections? How do you navigate that tension in a workplace setting?
That's a real art. It is. I think that there are dangers in bureaucracy. The greatest danger in bureaucracy is most bureaucracies that I've worked in and consulted for lose sight of the purpose of the organization, where the policies and procedures become the end and not the means.
Right.
So I think it's important to know what those policies and procedures are, and they can oftentimes be a good guideline. They can be effective and helpful as long as they are applied with flexibility so that they are serving the ultimate goal. So there's nothing wrong with, calling reference to the policies and procedures. But that shouldn't be the bottom line.
Right.
The goal isn't to obey the rule. The goal is to have a constructive process here and come out with a solution that we all think is reasonable and we can live with and we can work with.
No, absolutely.
Right.
No, that's really interesting. And can you speak a little bit to practical advice for leaders to help mediate conflict when they're put in a position where they're playing the role of the referee?
Right. I think it's important for good leaders to look at what's the best venue for solving this problem. I mean, there is a tendency, and this was popular stuff in the 70s and 80s, let's have a big meeting.
Right,
okay?
yeah.
And meetings are okay, but I read a quote once that by the economist Thomas Sowell, that anyone who likes meetings should never be in charge of anything. The meetings are useful if for one thing, if they address a need that no other venue can meet.
Right. Yeah.
The best, most useful role for big meetings is to learn on the part of the leader. Is to kind of get a sense of what the diversity of opinion is. Because sometimes people won't speak up unless there are other people there.
Right.
So, but large meetings can be counterproductive in some cases. We know from the social psychology literature that large groups of people will tend to make more extreme decisions than individuals will make. That's called the risky shift effect. I forget the author right offhand. But, and I have seen meetings that have tended to be more extreme than the people that I spoke to in the meetings before the meeting happened.
Right, yeah.
So sometimes you have to look at what's the best or most viable setting for this. Maybe this is a smaller group of people. That could be like 2 or 3 people. It might be useful to talk to people individually. But you also need to keep in mind, some people, if you talk to them individually, will find that intimidating.
Right, yeah.
Especially if you're the boss, the person who has power over their hiring or firing or their annual evaluation or whatever. Or if you're the outside consultant, who has indefinite, vague, but ominous powers, or at least it seems to the person.
Right, yeah.
So I think that's an important thing. You rely a lot on that for the people who report to you, the other people, the other heads of ministries or teachers or whatever that we referred to before, to kind of get a read for the situation. And sometimes it can be informal. I remember as a community psychology student, I was doing an intervention in a small a center that did work with children, and there were problems within the organization. And I found, and with advice from my professor, that hanging around the staff room and just talking to people as they come in.
Right.
How's it going? What do you do here? And because it was informal and a little bit unthreatening in that format, that allowed me to kind of establish, okay, a little bit of a feel for, okay, what might be going on here.
Right.
So if you can do it in an informal way, you can't always.
Yeah.
But and a lot of the times the nature of the issue will drive it. I mean, I've been in organizations where there was actual intimidation and violence. And that's a different kettle of fish. You really, I think, in those things have to be somewhat more formal. On the other hand, you might find group meetings really counterproductive in a case like that. Yeah. Because you can get people pretty steamed up in situations like that. So it has to be, you have to kind of pick and choose, but I think it is knowing how to intervene, how to, in a sense, to use an old community psychology term, how to join with the people that you're trying to help.
Right, yeah.
So it's usually the solution. You may have solution ideas as a leader, but I think you need to get a lot of bottom-up buy-in to it. So you need to listen a lot before you start, and you can direct that process, but I think that's where you start.
That's really interesting, yeah. And how do you create that, like, safe sense in a workplace environment where people feel that there is an opportunity to speak openly? Because like you said, you know, if you're a manager who's in charge of people's raises and hiring and firing and everything, there's an inherent power dynamic there that's hard to just get rid of. So how do you create an environment that feels comfortable for people to be honest in?
Right. It's a good question, and a lot of that will be influenced by how much conflict there is in the organization. I think that the person who's doing the intervention, no matter where they are on that ladder, I think that's really important to establish certain characteristics to it. One of which can be, this is a confidential conversation, and I will only, at the end of this, if you want me to bring any of this forward, I will ask you your permission if I can bring that forward. So if you don't tell me it's okay for me to share this with the manager or in this meeting that we're having, I won't.
Right, yeah.
So that you can vent this to me. And the other thing you can say is, it's important at this stage that we have openness, and so this is not going to show up on your performance evaluation unless you physically assault me or something like that. That I have to report.
Small caveats are important.
Small caveats, that's right. So I think you can establish some ground rules and the purpose of the conversation as well. The purpose of this, so for example, if my purpose in talking to you is I want to know kind of what's going on here. So I would say that. I just kind of need to, I'm getting a sense that there's some unhappiness here, and I just want to know what's going on. I'm not going to do anything with this yet.
Right.
And I'm not going to do anything until I talk to people again. And so you can establish it from that. My purpose is information gathering. And you may also have to build in some things with that, because people don't like to rat on one another, or don't like to be seen as ratting, which is probably more compelling. You know, if I come in here and tell you this, people are going to know. So it is important to keep in mind people's sense of safety, because that can be very, very detrimental in an organization if people feel that, you know, I said something and it's going to get out. So that's, I think those are important. So set the ground rules, give the reassurances necessary, and let them know the process.
Right.
If people know what they're dealing with and what's going to happen, they're much more likely to engage with that, and if they feel safe. And also, listen well.
Right.
Bring your patience. Don't take it personally. I think it's really important for managers to remember, this isn't about me, it's about the organization.
Right.
And when I say managers, that could be pastors, it could be principals, it could be anybody else. This is about the organization. And if people vent a bit, and I've had people vent at me quite stridently, and I've sort of done what I have to do, which is I keep my eye on the prize. I want a resolution out of this. And had those same people come back to me and apologize later when I didn't say anything back, and have it work out to be a good resolution.
Right, yeah.
And have them appreciate the fact that, okay, I was going to take that, and you can generate some humor about that afterwards. And
right.
You know, it's important to realize that if people are venting to you in an angry way, that doesn't necessarily mean they're angry at you. And so I think that's part of the sort of professional maturity I think that good leaders have.
For sure, being able to separate your ego a bit from what's actually
That's right.
happening.
That's right.
Yeah.
You know, if people are angry, they probably have a reason. Don't deflect that. Unless, I mean, obviously there are going to be guidelines. I mean, obviously personal abuse or something like that, or threatening gestures, that's not okay. But even that, I worked in child welfare before I was a psychologist. This is a terrible story to tell, but I had one guy, he had his fist back to punch me. And I sat just like I'm sitting now. I kept my hands on the arms of the chair, and I sat back in the chair, and I said, you really don't need this. Even as I was figuring out how am I going to duck.
Yeah.
And the thing was, his fist dissolved, and he put his hand down, and we were good.
Right.
And it's oftentimes that's the case. So try not to take it personally. Try to keep your cool. Try to remember that what you're doing is you're tapping something that may have gone unspoken for a long time.
Right. Yeah.
And if you hear somebody with a lot of, anger and aggressiveness in their talk, that's probably been suppressed for a long time. And so in a way, you're kind of lancing the wound here a bit. And once that's out, maybe we'll get a chance to resolve this.
Right.
But that's another case where it might not be good to do that at a big meeting.
Right. Yeah.
Because some people will take it the wrong way, be offended, be intimidated, feel that they can't talk to that person anymore, or will actually become aggressive towards that person.
Right.
So if you're dealing with an organization with a lot of what you take as untapped anger, you may need to deal with it or have your subordinates deal with it individually, but give them the pep talk. Don't take it personally.
Well, and right back to that idea too of that organizational structure and empowering people in those roles to
That's right.
Be part of the larger unit. That's absolutely incredible advice all around, and I really appreciate this insight. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Well, thanks for joining this conversation. I trust that you were encouraged and challenged by the stories and experiences that were shared today. Would you join us next week? You can find new episodes weekly in video form on the Aaron Ministries YouTube page and in audio form wherever you get your podcasts. Aaron Ministries is an interdenominational network of friends in ministry with a mission to foster healthy Christian leadership. Check out our website, aaronministries.com, for more information and resources and on how you can donate to our ministry and potentially start a healthy Christian leader gathering in your area. Until we meet again, may you experience the Lord's blessing, grace, and peace. I'll see you next week.